Over the last 4 decades, one of the most dangerous and persistent forces in American society has been right wing extremism. Many of the deadliest acts of terrorism on U.S. soil have come from within, driven by an ideology rooted in white supremacy, anti government conspiracy, religious fundamentalism, and hostility towards marginalized communities. It's been rooted in American history, from the post Civil War rise of the Ku Klux Klan to the violent opposition of the Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 60s. In the last 40 years, this movement has evolved, adapted, and resurfaced, becoming more sophisticated, more networked, and more willing to use violence to achieve its ends. In the 1980s, groups like The Order launched a wave of armed robberies and assassinations in pursuit of a white nationalist uprising. The 1990s saw an explosion of militia movements, stoked by paranoia about the federal government, culminating in the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in U.S. history, the 1995 Oklahoma City bombings, which killed 168 people, including children. As the years went on, white supremacist groups, anti immigrant extremists, and religious radicals carried out mass shootings, targeted politicians, and built one vast online community to spread their hateful ideology. But these weren't isolated incidents. In the aftermath of the 2020 election, these same ideologies helped fuel an unprecedented attack on the U.S. Capitol, as thousands of far right extremists sought to overturn the will of the American people. This is a story of 40 years of right wing extremism in America, a movement that continues to adapt, spread, and radicalize new followers. In this video, we're going to trace the history, how it began, how it spread, and how it became the most dangerous domestic threat to American democracy today. By the end, you'll see that this is a live threat that shapes our politics and our safety right now. Right wing extremism is defined as a range of ideologies that hold ultra conservative, authoritarian, ultra nationalist, and nativist views, positioning themselves as the far of the political right. These ideologies often reject liberal democratic norms and promote exclusive hierarchical views. Contemporary examples include neo-fascism, neo-Nazism, and white supremacy. While it's not limited to white people, i.e. Enrique Tarrio, Afro-Cuban man most known for being pardoned by Trump, it is synonymous with white supremacy. Case in point being the KKK, an organization started after emancipation to keep the newly freed Black population in line. This video is focused on the incidences of right-wing extremism in America, especially within the last 40 years. Recently, a madman stalked, killed, and tried to kill several members of Minnesota's state government. He was a devout religious conservative that spent time in other countries preaching the quote-unquote gospel. Vance Bolter's June 14th assault on Minnesota's lawmakers fits within the modern pattern of right-wing extremism and right-wing extremist violence. His methods, disguising himself as a police officer, meticulously stalking Democratic state legislators, and compiling a hit list of around 70 targeted individuals that included pro-abortion rights advocates and public officials, mirror a strategy seen in prior ideologically motivated domestic terror attacks. Unlike random acts of violence, Bolter's operation was deeply premeditated and politically driven, echoing past extremists who have attacked on the basis of perceived cultural and governmental threats. Moreover, Bolter was motivated by a confluence of right-wing beliefs: religious conservatism, strong anti-abortion ideology, and allegiance to Trump-era politics. Friends and public records recall sermons denouncing abortion and LGBTQ rights, a self-identification as a conservative who voted for President Donald Trump, and a flyer for the No Kings anti-Trump movement in his vehicle. This ideological blend aligns closely with the broader right-wing extremist movement that historically fuses religious fundamentalism, anti-government sentiment, and conspiratorial thinking, often serving as fodder for violent plots. But can we act surprised that this has been happening for almost 4 decades? In 1984, a neo-Nazi gang calling itself the Order set out to ignite a race war. They robbed armored cars, counterfeit money, and drew up a hit list of enemies. On June 18, 1984, Denver radio host Alan Berg, a Jewish man unafraid to denounce bigots on air, was gunned down in his driveway by Order members. The Order's leader, Robert May Matthews, vowed to never be taken alive. That December, cornered by the FBI at a remote cabin, Matthews died in a fiery shootout, instantly becoming a martyr in the eyes of white supremacists and the white supremacy movement. The Order crushed, but its members' ideology, inspired by novels like The Turner Diaries, lived on. The message to the far right: one of their own died for the cause, and others would be ready to pick up the gun. In the Ruby Ridge standoff, deep in the mountains of Idaho, federal marshals moved to arrest Randy Weaver, a separatist with ties to the Aryan Nation, on a firearms charge. Weaver and his family were holed up in a cabin on top of Ruby Ridge, armed and defiant. A tense 11-day siege erupted into violence. Weaver's 14-year-old son and his wife, Vicky, were killed by federal snipers, and a U.S. Marshal was also killed. But for the militant, he and his slain family became martyrs, proof of a tyrannical government, willing to kill its citizens. The tragedy at Ruby Ridge electrifies anti-government extremists across the country. In their eyes, the federal government, dubbed the Zionist occupational government, or Zionist-occupied government by neo-Nazis, had drawn first blood. Then in 1993, just months later, another siege made headlines worldwide. Outside of Waco, Texas, federal agents surrounded the compound of an apocalyptic religious sect known as the Branch Davidians. The group's leader, David Koresh, had been stockpiling illegal weapons. What begins with a shootout and the death of 4 federal agents spirals into a 51-day standoff. Then, on April 19, 1993, the FBI assaults the compound. Flames erupt. Whether started by cult members or accidentally during the assault remains disputed. And 76 men, women, and children perish in the inferno. To far-right militants, Waco becomes proof of their worst fear: a government willing to slaughter citizens to enforce its will. Ruby Ridge and Waco together kindle anti-government paranoia. Across the U.S., militias multiply, vowing never again and preparing for war with federal tyrants. In April of 1995, a massive explosion rips through the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. The 9-story building crumbles into ruin, its front completely ripped away. A scene of carnage. The bomb, made of fertilizer and fuel oil in a rental truck, was orchestrated by Timothy McVeigh, a 27-year-old Army veteran consumed by hatred of the federal government. McVeigh chose this deliberate date, the second anniversary of the Waco shooting, to exact revenge. The blast kills 168 people, including 19 children, and injures more than 680 others. It is, at the time, the deadliest attack of terrorism on American soil. McVeigh, seething over Ruby Ridge and Waco, believed he was striking a blow against tyranny. Most Americans recoiled in horror that one of our own could commit such an atrocity. In the aftermath, authorities cracked down on militias. McVeigh was executed in 2001, but in the shadows, others on the extreme right quietly celebrated McVeigh as a hero. His attack proved that the anti-government underground was willing to turn terror on the homeland, and that foreshadowed a violent future. Between 1996 and 1998, a campaign of anti-abortion bombings happened throughout the United States. Even as Oklahoma City's ruins smoldered, a different strand of right-wing extremism was waging its own holy war. Eric Rudolph, a self-proclaimed soldier in the Army of God, carried out 4 bombings across the South between 1996 and 1998. His targets, the world stage of the Atlanta Olympics, several abortion clinics, and a gay nightclub. On July 27, 1996, a bomb exploded amid a crowd at Centennial Olympic Park in Atlanta, killing 1 woman and injuring 100 more. Over the next 2 years, Rudolph strikes 3 more times, tear through an abortion clinic in Atlanta. In January 1998, Rudolph targets a Birmingham, Alabama women's clinic, killing an off-duty police officer and critically injuring a nurse. Rudolph vanishes into the Appalachian wilderness, eluding a massive manhunt for 5 years. He's finally caught in 2003, scavenging for food behind a grocery store. In a manifesto, Rudolph claims his violence was to stop the slaughter of unborn children and to punish the government's policy on promoting abortion on demand. He is unrepentant and sent away for multiple life terms. The far right isn't just militias and race warriors. It also harbors anti-abortion and anti-LGBTQ extremists willing to bomb and kill for their cause. Let's move forward to the late 90s and early 2000s. America shifted to foreign threats and Y2K fears, but homegrown extremism never disappeared. It only went underground. In 1989, a disgraced Marine named Buford O. Furrow, tied to the Aryan Nation, opened fire in a Los Angeles Jewish community center, wounding 5, including 3 children, then murders a Filipino-American carrier. 2001, 9/11 strikes. For a time, the American far right the spotlight to a foreign enemy. Yet the election of Barack Obama in 2008, the nation's first African-American president, reignites dormant hate. White supremacists and militia groups surge in number, feeding off racist conspiracy theories about Obama's birthplace, his religion, and what he's going to do with America. The Department of Homeland Security in 2009 warns in a report that a resurgence of right-wing extremism is underway, fueled by racial animosity and anti-government anger. That year, we begin to see the violent proof. In the spring of 2009, just months into Barack Obama's legacy, a spat of far-right attacks rocks the nation. In Kansas, Dr. George Tiller, one of the few abortion doctors providing late-term abortions, is assassinated in his church by an anti-government, anti-abortion zealot. Tiller is shot through the eye at point-blank range while serving as an usher on a Sunday morning, in front of horrified worshipers. Just 10 days later, on June the 10th, 2009, 88-year-old neo-Nazi named James W. Brunn walks into the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington and opens fire with a rifle. He murders Stephen Johns, a security guard who bravely steps in his way. Before Von Brunn himself is wounded by return fire, an avowed white supremacist and Holocaust denier, Von Brunn had ranted on the internet about treacherous Jews. Now, he turned those words into bullets. Federal authorities labeled the museum shooting an act of domestic terrorism. These two attacks, within days of each other, send an ominous signal embodied by an atmosphere of division and false grievances, like the birther lie about Obama. Right-wing extremisms are stepping out of the shadows and into open violence once again. Then we see white supremacist groups attacked other groups of people. On August 5th, 2012, a quiet Sunday morning, members of the Sikh community in Oak Creek, Wisconsin gathered for prayer. Without warning, a man burst in with a 9mm handgun and opens fire on the peaceful congregation. He is Wade Michael Page, a 40-year-old Army veteran and a hardcore white supremacist. Shoots indiscriminately, killing 6 worshipers, all of them of Indian descent, pillars of the community as well, and wounds others, including a responding police officer. The killer dies after a firefight with police. In the aftermath, investigators discover he had been deeply involved in neo-Nazi skinhead music bands, spewing hate in lyrics before translating it into murder. He likely chose temple in ignorance, conflating turbans and beards with his hatred of Muslims. But the effect is the same, an act of terror rooted in racist hate. The Oak Creek massacre shakes the nation. It's a grim reminder that even a small town house of worship can be targeted by the far right's violent obsession. In 2014, Overland Park Jewish Community Center shooting. The day before Passover, a retiree pulls into the parking lot of the Jewish Community Center in Overland Park, Kansas. This is Fraser Glenn Miller Jr. He's 73 years old, a former KKK Grand Dragon, and a lifelong anti-Semite. Armed with a shotgun and a pistol, Miller opens fire on people outside the JCC and a nearby Jewish retirement home. He kills 3 people, including a 69-year-old grandfather and a 14-year-old grandson. Tragically, none of the victims were actually Jewish. Miller didn't care. He was shooting anyone in sight. After his arrest, Miller proudly proclaims Heil Hitler in front of the cameras. He tells the court he wants to kill Jews and saw it as his mission. This was explicit, old-school, anti-Semitic terror, the kind that has motivated hate groups and hate crimes for centuries. Miller is sentenced to death, though he dies in prison of natural causes in 2021. The Overland Park attack underscores that violent white supremacy never went away. It was merely simmering, waiting for opportunities by extremists. In June 17th, 2015, Charleston church shooting at the Wednesday night Bible study. That's what brought a small group of black parishioners together at Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, a historic African-American church, nearly 200 years old at the time, that had stood as a beacon of black faith and resistance, even hosting Martin Luther King Jr. in the 1960s. Into that sacred space walked a 21-year-old stranger with pale skin and vacant eyes, Dylan Roof. The churchgoers welcomed him. He sat with them for an hour, listening to prayer. Then, while calm, Roof pulled out a Glock 45 and started shooting indiscriminately at the black congregants. He killed 9 people, including the senior pastor, Reverend Clementa Pinckney, a state senator, a heinous act of racist violence. As he reloaded, Roof uttered the words seared into the survivors' memories. I have to do it. You rape our women, and you're taking over our country. You have to go, he said. This was the language of white supremacy, the delusional race war narrative spoken aloud in a house of God. Roof later confessed that he hoped to spark a race war. Photographs emerged of him posing with the Confederate flag and a pistol, and a manifesto revealed he had been radicalized online by websites claiming that black men were raping white women and taking over. The Charleston church massacre horrified the nation, a stark reminder that the old hatred of the Jim Crow era was still lethal. Thousands mourned the 9 martyrs of Emanuel AME, and even the Confederate flag was lowered at South Carolina's Capitol that year. But the currents that drove Ruth, fear, racism, delusion of a white genocide, only continued to spread in the years to come. Then we fast forward not too much longer in 2017, Charlottesville, Virginia. Jews will not replace us, the chant that echoes by torchlight as hundreds of white nationalists marched through the University of Virginia's campus on August 11th, 2017. They carried tiki torches, evoking Klan rallies of old, faces contorted with anger. The next day, downtown Charlottesville becomes a battleground, the largest gathering of American white supremacists in decades. Neo-Nazis, KK, alt-right, and militiamen converge ostensibly to defend a statue of Robert E. Lee. They clash with anti-racist counter-protesters, and street fights erupt. Then, early afternoon, a gray Dodge Challenger suddenly plows into a crowd of peaceful counter-protesters. Bodies are thrown into the air. 32-year-old Heather is killed, and 19 others injured. The driver is James Alex Fields Jr., a 20-year-old neo-Nazi who came from the rally and decided to commit murder with his car. The Charlottesville attack shocks the country. Captured on video, it is undeniable domestic terrorism. Yet, in the wake of the tragedy, the nation's highest leader sends a muddled message. The president at the time, Donald Trump, refuses to decisively condemn the white supremacists. He infamously remarks that there were very fine people on both sides, as if equivalence can be drawn between Nazis and those protesting against them. Those words land like a gut punch. To the far right, it's a gleeful validation. On extremist forums, they cheer that the president has our back. Charlottesville's legacy is twofold. It exposed the growing boldness of America's white supremacists, and it hinted that elements of their worldview, like xenophobia and replacement fears, had crept into the political mainstream. Of swastikas and Confederate flags in an American city and a terrorist murder in broad daylight proved that the beast of hate was rearing its new head, more confident and more public. On October 27th, 2018, the Tree of Life synagogue had a shooting as well. Without warning, a man armed with an AR-15 and handguns stormed into a quiet synagogue and opens fire, shouting, "All Jews must die." It's the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in American history. The gunman, 46-year-old Robert Bowers, executes 11 worshipers, men and women aged 54 to 97, with chilling precision. The massacre isn't random. It's a culmination of grotesque conspiracy theories. Bowers had been ranting on the fringe social network Gab about Jewish organizations bringing invaders, refugees, and immigrants into the United States to, quote, kill our people. In particular, he fixated on HIAS, a Jewish refugee aid society, accusing Jews of orchestrating migrant caravans from Central America. In his final Gab post before the shooting, Bowers wrote, "Screw your optics, I'm going in." He then literally did so, turning an AR-15 on elderly Jews in prayer. The Tree of Life victims fell while wrapping scrolls or ushering friends to safety. The atrocity devastated not only Pittsburgh's Jewish community, but the entire nation. It was a stark reminder that anti-Semitism, the oldest hatred, had found new life on the internet and was now spilling blood in holy places. Bowers was captured and later sentenced to death, but even as he went to trial, other killers were already citing him as inspiration, part of a diabolical pattern of copycat terrorism stretching across borders. In 2019, there was a shooting at an El Paso Walmart. On a blistering summer day in El Paso, Texas, a border city where Mexican and American cultures intertwine freely, just before 10:40 a.m., back-to-school shoppers at a Walmart suddenly hear rapid cracks of gunfire. Panics, scream, and a young man is moving through the aisles with an AK-47 style rifle, methodically shooting anyone he sees. By the time the bullets stop, 23 people are dead and 22 injured, almost all of them Latino. The 21-year-old suspect, Patrick Crusius, drove over 600 miles from a Dallas suburb to carry out this slaughter. Why? We soon learned he published a manifesto online just minutes before the attack, a document dripping with racist hatred. Crusius ranted about a Hispanic invasion of Texas and claimed he was defending his country from cultural and ethnic replacement. These phrases are lifted directly from the so-called Great Replacement Theory, a white supremacist conspiracy theory claiming that the elites, often coded as Jews, are importing immigrants to replace white Americans. It's the same toxic lie that inspired the Charlottesville chanters, the Pittsburgh shooter, and terrorists abroad like the Christchurch, New Zealand mosque gunman. In El Paso, the lie motivated Crusius to target a Walmart known to be popular with Mexican and Mexican-American families. Among the fallen were a 15-year-old soccer player, a young mother shielding her baby, and an elderly man who heroically tried to pull others to safety. The El Paso attack was the deadliest anti-Latino hate crime in modern U.S. history. It shocked the conscience of a nation and the world. Crusius was captured and later sentenced to 90 life terms. But his deed ensured his evil ideology would echo. Indeed, less than a year later, another would attempt similar atrocities, driven by the same lie. The pattern was clear. Online radicalization, racist conspiracy theories, and easy access to high-powered guns were combining to produce terrorism, where lone actors erupt in mass violence from a swamp of shared hate. And of course, we can't forget the January 6th insurrection, a date that will be etched in U.S. history forever. The nation's capital, Washington, D.C., is trembling from political tensions. The incumbent president has spent months relentlessly propagating the big lie, a baseless conspiracy that the 2020 election was stolen from him. His words find fertile ground among far-right circles. Militia groups, white supremacists, QAnon cultists, and everyday Americans envelop in a cocoon of disinformation. The results are a powder keg. On January 6, 2021, as Congress meets to certify the election results, the powder keg explodes. A massive crowd of pro-Trump demonstrators, many armed and armored with tactical gear, storm barricades and police lines at the U.S. Capitol. They smash windows, beat officers, and flood into halls of Congress, forcing lawmakers to flee for their lives. It's the first siege of the U.S. Capitol since 1814, when a foreign army actually burned it to the ground. But this time, the attackers are Americans, wrapped in flags and betrayal. Some carry Confederate battle flags through the rotunda, a jarring symbol of white supremacist rebellion at the heart of government. Outside, insurrectionists have erected a makeshift gallows and guillotine, complete with a noose on Capitol ground. This shocking image, a noose under the shadow of the Capitol dome, carries a especially chilling resonance. Many observers noted that it resembles the Day of the Rope, fantasy from a neo-Nazi novel, The Turner Diaries, which envisions patriots hanging traitors in a future revolution. Indeed, amidst the mob are avowed neo Nazis, members of street fighting gangs like the Proud Boys, and militia affiliates like the Oath Keepers. The very kind of people who spent decades prepping for a violent showdown with tyranny. On January 6th, they acted out those fantasies, egged on by the president's words at a rally where he said, "Fight like hell," and by a belief that they were saving the nation. It was pandemonium and sedition. Chants of "Hang Mike Pence, the vice president," echoed in the corridors. An intruder was shot outside the speaker's lobby. Improvised explosives were planted nearby and later defused. When the dust settled, 5 people were dead, hundreds were injured, and a once unthinkable thing played out. American citizens, inflamed by lies, had attacked the democratic process itself. In the aftermath, dozens of participants, including leaders of extremist groups, were arrested and later convicted of serious crimes. The Capitol insurrection was the gruesome crescendo of decades of extremist agitation. It exposed how deeply the tentacles of right-wing radicalism had wound their way into the American mainstream. And yet, even after this unprecedented attack on democracy, the violence didn't stop. In May of 2022, the Buffalo supermarket shooting. On a quiet Saturday afternoon in Buffalo, New York, at a Tops-friendly market in a predominantly black neighborhood, shoppers strolled the aisles. Suddenly, a young man clad in body armor and wielding a semi-automatic rifle pulls into the parking lot and opens fire with military precision. He shoots 4 people outside, then steps inside and continues his rampage, specifically hunting black victims. In total, 10 people are killed and 3 more wounded. Almost all of them black Americans. The shooter is Peyton Gendron, an 18-year-old from a small town hours away. He has driven and chosen this store in a city for one reason. Its zip code has the highest concentration of black residents in upstate New York. Like others before him, he did not act in a vacuum. He left behind a hateful manifesto detailing his beliefs. He had been radicalized online, spending the pandemic days lurking on extremist forums. There, he absorbed the same great replacement lie that fueled the El Paso shooter and the Christchurch mosque attacker. His manifesto praised those killers and espoused a delusional mission to stop white genocide. He even painted racist slogans on his weapon and live-streamed the massacre on Twitch, as if following the script laid out by prior terrorists. The Buffalo shooting was another cruel chapter in the saga of an American teenager indoctrinated into white supremacist ideology via the internet committing mass murder to advance a cause defined by only hate. The Justice Department labeled it a hate crime and domestic terror. Federal prosecutors would go to seek the death penalty. For the community, the trauma was incalculable. Grandmothers, fathers, a retired police officer, all slaughtered in a routine grocery trip. For the nation, it underscored a terrifying reality. Even after the wake-up call of January 6th, the disease of racist extremism continued to metastasize. Each of the incidences that we went over today, from the 1980s and the 90s militia to the church and synagogue massacres to the Capitol siege, is a bloody thread woven into a larger tapestry. Over 40 years, the forces of right-wing extremism in America have proven remarkably persistent, adapting to each era. What began as an isolated pocket of neo-Nazism and Klan activity in the 1980s evolved into a wider movement. Survivalist militias, anti-government patriots, anti-abortion crusaders, lone wolf mass shooters radicalized on YouTube and 8chan. The ideology is fluid. White supremacy, anti-Semitic conspiracy, anti-government rage, homophobia, misogyny, and anti-black racism. But the through line is a rejection of pluralistic democracy and a belief in achieving goals through violence and intimidation. Over time, this extremist fringe did something truly dangerous. It bled into the political mainstream. The rise of social media amplified their propaganda. Politicians began echoing milder versions of their talking points. By 2016, a presidential campaign openly flirted with nativist, far-right themes and won, convincing many in the movement that their views had mass validation. Once marginalized ideas like the Muslim ban and mass deportation became policy proposals. The result has been an emboldening of extremists unlike anything in modern memory. Are no longer hiding in the woods. Some are marching in the streets, running for local offices, or boasting about their exploits on cable television. And so the story comes full circle. What happens when a democracy ignores decades of warning signs? This: men with assault rifles storming its legislature, convinced that they're heroes. Young ideologues massacring fellow citizens in churches, synagogues, and supermarkets, believing they're saving their race of unborn children. Each incident we've recounted was a canary in the coal mine. Each time we hear afterwards, this isn't us. This isn't America. But it is part of America, a part we must confront. The final irony is that these extremist currents, left unchecked, pave the way for a climate in which authoritarianism itself has crept closer. The movement that worshipped violence and exalted strongman ideas helped prepare the ground for a political figure who channeled their grievances and anger in power. We won't name names, but the trajectory is unmistakable. 40 years of creeping far-right radicalization brought us to this point, a moment where the peaceful transfer of power, the bedrock of our republic, was nearly derailed by a mob inspired by an authoritarian lie. The blood spilled by the Order, by McVeigh, by Roof, by Bowers, by countless others. It has watered a tree of extremism that now casts a long shadow over our democracy. Yet, knowledge is a form of resistance. By remembering these events and connecting the dots, we refuse to look away. We honor the victims by telling the truth about what killed them. Not just individuals, but an ideology of hatred and fear, in shining light on 40 years of right-wing extremist violence. Perhaps we steel ourselves to comfort. The story isn't over, but one lesson rings out. The longer we ignore the warning signs, the more our nation stands to lose. Each bullet point of this history is written in the blood of innocent, and it urges us with moral urgency to prevent the next chapter. The choice is as a society to heed this warning.